Hello guys, welcome to my channel where stories filled with revenge, moral lessons, and love are told. Go ahead and like, share with your friends, and subscribe. I trudged through the marble halls of Edward's penthouse, my heels clicking against the polished floors in a rhythm that felt like a countdown to the life I had quietly lost. I used to be someone who knew her worth, someone who had dreams of her own, but those dreams had slowly been replaced by Edward's. He had a way of making the world revolve around him, of making every achievement of mine feel insignificant unless it was under his shadow. When we first met, he was charming, dazzling, the kind of man whose presence made people forget to breathe. I was smitten, blinded by his charisma, and I didn't notice the subtle chains being wrapped around my life. At first, it wasn't obvious. He applauded the dinners I hosted, the charity events I organized, and the little celebrations we had with our circle of elite friends. "You're the perfect complement to my life, Celeste," he would say, brushing a strand of hair from my face with that infuriating mix of tenderness and control. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. But over time, the compliments dwindled, replaced with critiques and casual dismissals that stung more than any argument ever could. "You're lucky to have me, Celeste," he'd say, his eyes sharp, almost predatory. "Without me, you wouldn't know where to start." I remember the first time I suggested starting a small side project, a consulting venture to advise emerging brands on public image management. My heart raced with excitement, imagining a space where my creativity and insight mattered outside Edward's empire. I presented my idea over dinner one night, my hands trembling slightly with anticipation. "Celeste, that's cute," he said, leaning back in his chair with a smirk. "But let's be honest, you wouldn't last a month without me guiding you. Stick to being my wife. That's your calling." I felt my stomach twist, the words lodged there like a bitter pill I couldn't swallow. That night, I cried silently in our bedroom, feeling the walls close in, the chandelier above me suddenly a symbol of my entrapment. Divorce wasn't sudden, it was a slow unraveling. Every meeting with his lawyers, every conversation that ended with him sneering, "You'll never amount to anything without me," carved itself into my mind like a tattoo I didn't want. Friends whispered encouragement, but how could anyone understand the humiliation of loving someone who derived satisfaction from diminishing you? I spent nights questioning every choice, every ambition I had dared to express. For a while, I nearly gave in to despair, believing perhaps he was right. Maybe I wasn't capable alone, but grief has a strange way of sharpening resolve. When the papers were finally signed and the divorce settlement handed over, I remember staring at the numbers with a mixture of relief and bitter taste. Edward thought he had won, that his words would haunt me into insignificance. Yet in that quiet moment, sitting alone in my small apartment far from the penthouse I had once called home, a spark ignited. I would not let him define me. Every insult, every sneer, every cold dismissal became fuel. His arrogance had underestimated me, and I intended to prove it not to him, initially, but to myself. The months after the divorce were grueling. I had to rebuild not just financially, but emotionally. My social calendar was empty. Former friends had aligned themselves with Edward's world, and I was starting from scratch. I immersed myself in research, late-night calls, and relentless study of business strategies, market trends, and the art of persuasion. The first clients I pitched my services to were hesitant, some dismissive. I recall sitting across from a CEO who barely looked at me, saying, "You're just starting? And you want me to trust my brand in your hands?" I wanted to scream, to throw the folder in his face, but instead I smiled, calm and collected, and laid out my vision with precision. The first yes I earned felt like a victory not just over the world, but over Edward's lingering shadow in my mind. Despite the progress, loneliness clung to me. I often walked the city streets at night, past the glittering skyscrapers that reminded me of the life I had once shared with Edward, wondering if I had the resilience to truly succeed. I questioned every decision, every strategy, every client I pursued. Yet, with each small win, the launch of a campaign that restored a tarnished reputation, the client referrals, the growing recognition, I felt my confidence rebuild piece by piece. I began to recognize myself again, the woman I had been before Edward's charm masked his control. I was learning to trust my instincts, to assert my ideas, and to celebrate my achievements without apology. And then, there were moments of reflection that pierced me sharper than any insult Edward had ever thrown. I remembered the extravagant dinners, the vacations where I played the perfect wife while suppressing my own ambitions, and the countless times I had silenced my voice to avoid confrontation. The memory of those nights became a silent teacher. I realized that my past entanglement had been a lesson, cruel but necessary. It had exposed my vulnerabilities, but it had also revealed my strength. I was not defined by his opinion, nor by the luxurious cages he had constructed around me. It was in these moments, walking alone along the riverfront with the city lights reflecting on the water, that I made an unspoken promise to myself. I would build, I would grow, and I would thrive not to prove Edward wrong, though he lingered in my mind, but to reclaim the identity I had lost. I would create a life so rich in accomplishment and self-worth that his presence would become irrelevant. The bitterness I felt transformed into determination. Each whispered insult from him became a brick in the foundation of the empire I was determined to create. By the time the first anniversary of the divorce arrived, I had already launched the preliminary operations of my crisis management firm. The office was modest, a small space in a business district that hummed with ambition, but it was mine. I could decorate it, organize it, and most importantly, run it according to my vision. Every phone call, every client meeting, every pitch was a reminder that I had reclaimed control. And while Edward's name occasionally surfaced in gossip or old acquaintances' remarks, it no longer wielded power over me. I was learning, slowly but surely, that freedom and self-respect were the most luxurious lives I could ever inhabit. It wasn't a clean break from pain. Late at night, when exhaustion made the city's noise fade, I still recalled his smirk, the arrogance in his posture, and the way he had made me doubt myself. But those recollections no longer struck fear, they fueled clarity. I began to understand that the life I had endured with Edward, though suffocating, had been a crucible. It had forged resilience, strategic thinking, and a resolve I would not have discovered otherwise. I started journaling every breakthrough, every small victory, reminding myself of the trajectory I was creating, one defined by my choices, not his judgments. Slowly, I noticed a subtle shift in how I carried myself. My posture was no longer one of compliance or quiet submission. My gaze met people's eyes without hesitation. My voice, once soft and deferential, now carried confidence and authority. Friends who had doubted me or dismissed my potential began reaching out, curious and cautiously admiring. I welcomed these reconnections, but I kept a careful boundary. My journey was mine alone. Each encounter reinforced that my sense of self could not be borrowed or inherited. It could only be earned. And through it all, a quiet fire burned in me. I realized that Edward's power over me had always been illusory. His wealth, his charisma, his judgment, they had been formidable only because I had allowed them to define my worth. As I walked through this new chapter of my life, the city skyline stretching endlessly before me, I felt a surge of independence I had never known. The woman who once trembled at Edward's words had evolved into someone who could navigate challenges with grace, intelligence, and unshakable confidence. I had become my own kind of extraordinary. The first day I officially opened the doors of my crisis management firm, which I named Luminere Strategies, I felt a mix of exhilaration and terror. The office was small, with glass walls that caught the morning light in a way that made the space feel far larger than it was. I had invested every penny of my divorce settlement into this venture, a decision that both terrified and thrilled me. I remember arranging the chairs around the conference table, straightening the pens, and rehearsing my introduction as though I were preparing for a battle I couldn't afford to lose. Every detail mattered because this was not just a business, it was the embodiment of my reclaimed life. The first client meeting was a test I would never forget. I sat across from a young tech entrepreneur named Marcus Leary, who had initially hesitated to trust a woman leading a firm that was brand new in the market. His skepticism was palpable. "You're just starting out, Ms. Carter," he said, his voice polite but cutting. "How can I be sure you'll handle my company's reputation if things go south?" I felt a surge of familiar frustration, the one Edward had often exploited, but I breathed, allowed the anger to refine my focus, and responded with measured confidence. I laid out our methodology, our research capabilities, and a proactive crisis simulation that left him silent for several moments. Finally, he nodded, a small but decisive gesture that marked my first victory. That yes became the foundation on which I would begin to build credibility. The months that followed were grueling. I juggled multiple client cases, some of which involved high-stakes media crises that could make or break reputations overnight. There were nights when I stayed in the office until the city's lights dimmed, poring over press releases, drafting statements, and coordinating rapid response teams. I learned to navigate the subtle politics of boardrooms, to anticipate media spin, and to advise clients with a clarity that surprised even myself. Every challenge reinforced the skills I had buried during my years with Edward. I realized that resilience was not innate. It was forged through relentless effort, through pushing beyond fear, and through refusing to let setbacks define me. At times, the solitude was crushing. The friends I had known in Edward's world had mostly drifted away, leaving only distant messages of encouragement. But I found companionship in my work, in the team I had carefully assembled. Each employee I hired brought a complementary strength, and together we created a rhythm that allowed our firm to thrive. I took care to cultivate a culture of respect and collaboration, something I had rarely experienced under Edward's domineering shadow. The office became a sanctuary of creativity, strategy, and ambition, a place where I could finally operate as my authentic self. 3 years into the journey, Luminere strategies had begun to command attention. We had successfully handled crises for several notable brands, and our reputation for discretion and efficiency spread through whispers and referrals. It was during this time that I was introduced to Thomas Wellington, a media mogul with a presence so commanding that even seasoned CEOs felt a momentary hesitation in his gaze. The opportunity to partner with him on a high-profile campaign was a turning point. Securing this partnership would not only solidify the firm's credibility, but also affirm that the decisions I had made, the sacrifices I had endured, and the nights I had spent in solitude were worth it. The dinner with Thomas was arranged at a restaurant that matched his stature: private, understated, and refined. I arrived early, dressed in a sleek navy dress that balanced professionalism with understated elegance. The evening air was crisp, carrying the faint hum of the city as I approached the private dining room where I was to meet Thomas Wellington. My heart was steady, though not without the familiar flutter that accompanies moments of significance. Years of preparation had led to this moment, yet nothing could have readied me for the intensity of what awaited. I had envisioned this dinner countless times, but reality had a way of adding layers of complexity that imagination never captured. Thomas greeted me with his signature calm authority, shaking my hand firmly. "Celeste, it's good to finally meet in person," he said. There was a warmth in his tone, a curiosity about the woman who had built a firm capable of managing crises that could topple empires. I smiled, returning the handshake with confidence. "It's an honor, Mr. Wellington. I've been looking forward to discussing our collaboration." We exchanged pleasantries, and the conversation quickly transitioned into the intricacies of the deal, the strategies, potential pitfalls, and our unique approach to crisis management. Thomas's attention to detail impressed me, yet I noticed he allowed space for my insights, recognizing the authority I had cultivated over these past years. Then I saw him. Edward. Tall, perfectly groomed, with the air of someone accustomed to commanding attention without even trying. He was with Patricia, whose smile seemed carefully rehearsed, unaware of the tension that crackled invisibly between our worlds. My stomach clenched momentarily, a reflexive echo of the fear and frustration I had felt during our marriage. But I exhaled slowly, letting calmness settle over me. I had walked through fire and emerged resilient. This was not a confrontation. This was a moment to demonstrate the culmination of my efforts. Edward's gaze met mine, and I could see a flicker of recognition, then surprise as he processed the woman before him. I had changed. Not just in appearance, though I looked composed and poised in my tailored attire, but in presence, confidence, and authority. The years of humiliation, doubt, and quiet endurance had forged me into someone he could no longer underestimate. I felt a subtle thrill in witnessing the first cracks in the facade of his certainty. He approached our table, smiling in a way that suggested casual recognition, though his eyes betrayed the shock he couldn't fully mask. "Celeste," he said, attempting nonchalance, as if our history were irrelevant. I nodded politely, my composure unshaken. There was no warmth in my tone, only the controlled elegance I had perfected over the years. I introduced him succinctly to Thomas, calling him plainly my ex-husband. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of boundaries firmly established. Thomas's curiosity was evident, and Edward's surprise deepened as I explained my firm's recent achievements and the strategic partnership we were finalizing. Thomas leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with interest. "That's impressive, Celeste," he said. "Your approach to crisis management is meticulous, proactive, and innovative. Not many firms can anticipate media backlash with such precision." Edward's mouth opened slightly, and I noticed the subtle tension in his jaw. The disbelief in his gaze was unmistakable. For years, he had believed my value was tethered exclusively to being his wife. Now, the truth sat before him. I was a formidable professional, independent, and capable. Edward attempted to engage, asking questions that I could tell were designed to mask astonishment. "So, you manage crises for companies that could, collapse under negative press?" he asked, trying to maintain composure. I responded calmly, explaining the processes we had developed, the teams we coordinated, and the results we consistently achieved. Each detail highlighted the precision, dedication, and foresight I had poured into Luminere strategies. Thomas listened intently, nodding occasionally, clearly impressed by the depth and effectiveness of my operations. I noticed Patricia shifting in her seat, curious but unaware of the history layered into the conversation. She glanced at Edward and then at me, a polite smile on her face, as though she were trying to interpret the unspoken tension. I chose to remain focused on the business discussion, allowing the professional authority I had built to speak louder than any words of resentment or past grievances. In that room, I was not the woman Edward had once controlled. I was Celeste Carter, CEO, strategist, and partner in a venture that was about to achieve remarkable success. Edward's questions became more frequent, his casual attempts at commentary tinged with an unfamiliar uncertainty. "And you? Managed to get him on board?" he asked, referring to Thomas, his voice betraying both curiosity and incredulity. I smiled subtly, emphasizing the partnership without needing to boast. "Yes, Thomas and I identified opportunities for collaboration that align with both of our visions. It's mutually beneficial, and our teams are already coordinating the initial phases." The weight of my words, delivered with calm confidence, left Edward momentarily speechless. Dinner progressed with a steady rhythm of conversation and subtle observation. I could sense Edward's mind working, trying to reconcile the woman he thought he knew with the professional force seated before him. Thomas's praise and engagement only accentuated the contrast. The dynamic in the room had shifted entirely. Edward was no longer the dominant presence in my world. My achievements, diligence, and strategic acumen had carved a space of respect and authority that he could not touch. I realized that the encounter was less about him and more about affirming my journey, proving to myself that my worth had never depended on his validation. As the evening drew to a close, I reflected on the path that had led me here. From the suffocating confines of a marriage that suppressed my potential, I had navigated years of challenge, built a firm from the ground up, and established partnerships that demanded respect on a global scale. Edward's presence, once a source of anxiety and self-doubt, now served as a reminder of how far I had come. I felt a quiet satisfaction, tempered with empathy for the man who had underestimated me, and gratitude for the lessons adversity had forced upon me. After Edward and Patricia left, Thomas and I discussed next steps with renewed focus. The excitement of finalizing a major project alongside someone of his experience and insight was palpable. I knew that this partnership would amplify Luminere Strategies' reach, cementing our reputation as a formidable firm capable of navigating complex, high-stakes situations. I felt a surge of accomplishment and pride, not for the shock value it might have delivered to Edward, but for the undeniable proof that my perseverance and skill had yielded tangible, transformative results. And in that reflective moment, I realized the most important victory was internal. I had proven to myself that I was capable of achieving extraordinary things without relying on anyone's validation, even that of someone who had once dominated my world. The journey had been arduous, marked by loneliness, uncertainty, and relentless effort, but the clarity and confidence I had gained were invaluable. My worth, I understood, was inherent, defined by my choices, determination, and integrity rather than the opinions or actions of others. I learned that setbacks are not obstacles to be feared, but opportunities to cultivate strength, resilience, and insight. The expiry. Huel, the underestimation had become the very foundation of my success. Every late night, every moment of doubt, every calculated risk had contributed to the woman I had become. I was no longer defined by past failures, by the judgments of Edward, or by anyone else's perception. I had reclaimed my identity, my power, and my confidence. Looking forward, I embraced the future with a clear understanding that true success lies in self-realization and authentic achievement. The journey was no longer about revenge or proving someone wrong. It was about honoring my own capabilities, nurturing growth, and creating a legacy built on integrity and excellence. Every decision I made, every strategy one implemented, and every partnership I forged would carry the imprint of a woman who had endured, learned, and risen stronger than ever. The moral lesson of my journey is clear. Life may present formidable challenges, and people may attempt to diminish your potential, but your true power lies in recognizing your inherent worth and resilience. Obstacles are opportunities to discover strength. Setbacks can be catalysts for growth, and the opinions of others cannot define your path. By embracing self-belief, perseverance, and integrity, you can transform adversity into achievement, proving that the greatest validation comes not from others, but from the knowledge that you have overcome, grown, and thrived on your own terms. Remember, your setbacks do not define you, they refine you. And through dedication, focus, and courage, your potential is limitless, waiting only for you to claim it. Please like, subscribe, share with friends, and leave your comment on the lesson you learned.